is Jane Atchison. I'm the acting chief social worker at the board, and I'm joined today by Oliver Foisey, chief psychologist, as well as Glenda Brown, chief of mental health programming. Tonight's presentation is on ADHD and sleep management. Due to a technical glitch, we were unable to present this presentation originally during week 5 of our 6-week presentation. But as promised, we're emailing this out to everyone tonight, and it will also be posted on our board website. The mental health and well-being team at the school board has worked to create these 6 information series for parents because we know that the pandemic has impacted all of us in a variety of ways. You're able to see all 6 of the presentations on the board website underneath the mental health tab, so please feel free to go and check them out. We know that as students continue to learn virtually, the pandemic is becoming really very difficult at times for families and students, and we want to support you in supporting your child. It's been hard to keep kids in their routine and they miss their teachers and friends. So there's a wide range of emotions and stressors that people have been managing. Our intent is to share information with you over the course of these 6 sessions that will assist you in supporting your child in all aspects of their well-being. We know that there have been some tough times and we want to support you in supporting your child. I would like it if we could please center ourselves in prayer before we begin. So if you like, please join me in the sign of our faith. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. This prayer is called Slow Me Down, Lord. Slow me down, Lord. Ease the pounding of my heart by the quieting of my mind. Steady my harried pace with a vision of the eternal reach of time. Give me in the confusions of my day the calmness of the everlasting hills. Break the tensions of my nerves with the soothing music of the singing streams that live in my memory. Help me to know the magical power of sleep. Teach me the art of taking minute vacations or slowing down to look at a flower, to chat with an old friend or to make a new one, to pet a dog, to watch a spider build a web, to smile at a child or read a few lines from a good book. Slow me down, Lord, and inspire me to send my roots deep into the soil of life's enduring values, that I may grow towards the stars of our greater destiny. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And now we will do a land acknowledgement.
Has a relationship to the natural environment, the land, water, earth, the habitat, and ecosystems. Land acknowledgements provide us with an opportunity to offer recognition, respect to the original inhabitants of the regions that we live in and work on. There are many things that we can do to go beyond simply reading a land acknowledgement script. To make it more meaningful, we need to consider that we are, in fact, acknowledging not only the ancestral lands, but also the historical and complex intersections of settler impacts on Indigenous histories, economies, ecologies, livelihood, well-being, and governance structures. A territorial acknowledgement is not an endpoint in the journey of reconciliation. Actions create conditions for true reconciliation and create a foundation for restoring, renewing, or developing a new relationship with Indigenous peoples. For hundreds of years, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Attawaddaron, the Potawatomi, the Wendat, and Lenape nations have sought to walk gently on this land. They assisted the first European travelers to this territory and shared their knowledge for survival in what was, at times, a harsh climate. Under consultations from elders, knowledge holders from the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and 6 nations of the Grand River Territory, the Indigenous Education Advisory Committee, along with Halton Catholic District School Board, created this land acknowledgement.
Halton, as we know it today,
is rich in the history and modern traditions
of many First Nations and the Métis.
From the lands of the Anishinaabe
to the Attawaddaron,
the Haudenosaunee,
and the Métis.
These lands surrounding the Great Lakes
are steeped in Indigenous history,
As we gather today
on these treaty land,
our Catholic social teachings
call us in solidarity
with our Indigenous brothers and sisters
to honor and respect
the four directions: lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors
that walked before us.
All these wonderful elements of creation exist,
gifted to us by our Creator God. We acknowledge and thank
the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation
for being stewards of this traditional territory.
Good evening and a warm welcome to everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you all tonight. My name is Glenda Brown and I am very happy to be here with you tonight with all of you. My name is Glenda Brown and I'm the Chief of Mental Health Programming, and I work alongside Jane Atchison, the Acting Chief Social Worker, and Oliver Friese, the Chief of Psychology, in the delivery of mental health supports for the students here at HCDSB. We have a wonderful and very talented team of social workers, child and youth counselors, and psychoeducation consultants and psychologists who will be presenting and who have been presenting each week on topics that you have identified as being important to you. We are thrilled to have you join us tonight, and we hope that you tune in each week to participate and view our parent caregiver info sessions. The chosen topics are related to the needs of parents and caregivers that are identified on this slide, are the result of consulting and seeking feedback from administrators, parent surveys, administrators, and support services, along with our SEAC committee, our Special Education Advisory Committee. The topics presented have included mental health and anxiety, parenting during the COVID pandemic, raising a resilient child, and ADHD and sleep. Please note that all of the presentations will be recorded and posted on the board website for easy access and for you to be able to view at your convenience.
So, welcome to this session about ADHD and sleep. This presentation was prepared by a number of our psychological associate psychologists and psychoeducational consultants from our psychology team. Among those were Jessica Anderson, Jenny Archibald, Leanne Yun, Mikkel Delmas, and Paige Walker. You will see all of these in our presentation. While this presentation is about ADHD, you might find this useful as well, even if your child does not have ADHD. And the information about sleep is also relevant for all of our children, and you may find that some of the information applies to a lot of students during COVID and the particularly challenging situation during this pandemic with learning at home. So I hope you'll enjoy this presentation, and as always, there's resources at the end for you to find, and you can also rewatch the session online when we post it on our website.
Welcome to our presentation on ADHD and sleep. This presentation will address what we can do as a community to help children who have been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. We will also address the current scientific evidence regarding sleep management for children and adolescents, particularly those who have ADHD. My brain has too many tabs open. We will address in our presentation what attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is, or ADHD, the signs and symptoms of ADHD, and what parents can do, general strategies, ADHD, and sleep. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition, the way the brain develops, that interferes with a student's ability to regulate activity level, hyperactivity, inhibit behavior, impulsivity, and/or attend to the task at hand, inattention. ADHD looks different in each student. It is described as a persistent or ongoing pattern of inattention and/or hyperactivity, impulsivity that gets in the way of daily life or typical development. Individuals with ADHD may also have difficulties with attention and executive function, or the brain's ability to begin an activity, organize itself, and manage tasks, as well as working memory. There are 3 presentations of ADHD: predominantly inattentive, or predominantly hyperactive impulsive, or a combined presentation, which is a combination of both inattentive and hyperactive impulsive. Predominantly inattentive presentation, you will find individuals that have difficulty organizing or finishing tasks. They may have difficulty paying attention to details or to follow instructions or conversations. They may be easily distracted or forget details of daily routines. A person with predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation may fidget and talk a lot. It's hard for them to sit still for a long time, for example at a meal or while doing homework. Smaller children may run, jump, or climb constantly. The individual may feel restless and have trouble with impulsivity. Someone who is impulsive may interrupt others a lot, grab things from people, or speak at inappropriate times. It is hard for the person to wait their turn or listen to directions. And combined presentation is a combination of the above 2 types that are equally present in the person. Children with ADHD have many talents and strengths. They have creative minds, curiosity, boundless energy, humor, courage, leadership abilities, physical abilities, stamina, and often show amazing gifts in specialized areas like computers, math, music, art, etc. Living with ADHD may give the person a different perspective on life and encourage them to approach tasks and situations with a thoughtful eye. As a result, some with ADHD may be inventive thinkers. Other words to describe them may be original, artistic, and creative. Some students with ADHD often have seemingly endless amounts of energy that they are able to channel towards success on the playing field. Some students with ADHD may become hyper-focused. The benefit to that is that when given an assignment, a person with ADHD may work at it until its completion without breaking concentration. Sometimes a student with ADHD needs assistance in harnessing these traits to their benefit. Teachers, counselors, therapists, and parents can all play a role. They can help a person with ADHD explore a creative side or devote energy to finishing a task. How common is ADHD? Well, the prevalence of ADHD for children and youth under the age of 18 ranges from 5 to 12%. Given these statistics, it would be rare not to have at least one student with ADHD in a class. In fact, it is more likely that there are 2 to 3 students in a class that have ADHD. It is most commonly diagnosed in childhood, as it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. For many reasons, students who experience difficulty with attention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity may not receive support.
ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. That means it is just the way the brain develops. Individuals with ADHD tend to have abnormal functioning of certain brain chemicals known as neurotransmitters. Although the cause of ADHD are not totally understood, studies show that parents and siblings of children with ADHD often have similar symptoms. We know from studies that ADHD is genetically passed on. Heritability of ADHD is about 75%, similar to eye color and height. Several factors seem to contribute to ADHD. Scientists believe that genes and environmental factors cause subtle brain alterations. When the fetus is exposed to alcohol, nicotine, and environmental toxins, these brain alterations could result in ADHD-like symptoms. When 2 or more disorders occur at the same time, they are called co-occurring disorders. A study from the National Institute of Mental Health on ADHD found that 2/3 of individuals with ADHD have at least one other co-occurring problem. The most common conditions or problems that exist with ADHD include the following: anxiety, depression, learning disabilities, Tourette syndrome, speech problems, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar disorder, sleep problems, and substance abuse. Regardless of the cause of ADHD, it is important to recognize the signs and symptoms and understand what it looks like. Individuals with ADHD will require support from teachers and parents longer than their peers. This is because there is often a 2 to 3 year delay in executive functioning. Executive functioning impacts an individual's ability to regulate their attention, behavior, and emotions. In addition to difficulty managing attention and behavior, it is important to recognize that children and youth with ADHD may also be more irritable and argumentative as they learn to monitor, regulate, and process their emotions, which is a key component of executive functioning. Think about it this way. ADHD is like having a Ferrari engine for a brain with bicycle brakes. Using this analogy, if children and youth learn to strengthen their brakes, they can better reach their potential. It is important to note that ADHD also impairs cognitive processes related to perceiving, thinking, remembering, and learning. Symptoms associated with ADHD are evident in different settings. However, these symptoms may look different depending on the setting. Because of this, we will go through some examples of how the same symptom may appear different at home compared to at school. First, kids with ADHD can be easily distracted by noises, sights, and their own thoughts. So at home, your child may start putting away their toys, but stop to see why the dog is barking. At school, they may have the skills to answer test questions, but leave some items blank. Second, they may have trouble paying attention and retaining information. At home, you may notice that your child is constantly asking you to repeat what you have said, whereas a teacher may state that your child struggles to remember instructions. Third, kids with ADHD often have trouble waiting or giving up on what they want. At home, you may notice that your child continues to ask for something after you have said no. At school, they may cut to the front of the line or insist on being first. Fourth, they may talk excessively. At home, this may look like interrupting you while you are on the phone, whereas at school, they may talk when they are not supposed to. Fifth, kids with ADHD often struggle with organization and planning. At home, their room may be messy. At school, they may miss things that they need for class. Sixth, they have difficulty following through on tasks. For instance, at home, they may start setting the dinner table, but stop halfway through. The teacher may notice that they complete the first side of the math sheet, but ignore the other side. Seventh, they often speak without thinking or speak without anticipating the reaction of others. At home, this may look like saying something hurtful to a sibling, and at school, they may share too much personal information with a classmate. ADHD has the potential to impact different aspects of an individual's life. A child or youth may struggle in school, such as having learning problems or behavioral problems. They may also experience challenges with attention, have issues with attendance, or have persistent complaints of physical symptoms. Individuals with ADHD can experience social and relational concerns. For instance, they may misperceive social cues or have difficulty managing their emotions around peers. Individuals with ADHD may resort to alcohol and/or drug use and are at increased risk for substance abuse. Observing the signs and symptoms of ADHD can be like thinking about an iceberg. Only a small fraction of the iceberg is visible above the waterline. Like an iceberg, some signs of ADHD are obvious. You also need to know what is below the surface in order to best understand and support your child. Many of the indicators are less apparent, appearing below the surface. When we take a closer look at this iceberg, The signs and symptoms that are most obvious, listed above the waterline, are behavioral signs. This may include things such as being unable to sit still, daydreaming, being distracted, interrupting others, or having difficulty waiting their turn. Signs and symptoms that are less obvious or listed below the waterline are things such as poor memory, having an impaired sense of time, or having difficulty sleeping.
Thanks very much, Jessica. One to be concerned. As you can see in this particular slide, we have to consider disproportion, we have to consider duration, we have to consider disruption, and we have to consider distress when it comes to diagnosing ADHD, because obviously all people have features and symptoms that are consistent, that are the same, very similar to ADHD, but really the takeaway from this particular slide is the level of impairment. We really need to ask ourselves, to what degree are these particular features, disproportion, duration, distress, and disruption, to what degree are they disrupting our daily living and our functioning in daily living? So really the most prominent signs and symptoms of ADHD when we're talking about elementary versus secondary, at the elementary level, they're a little bit more pronounced. So for example, students may appear as being fidgety or running or climbing, blurting out answers. And with respect to the running, trying to run away from the class or from the school, they're slow at processing. It takes them time to process information. And sometimes they struggle with their friendships and they act a little bit younger than their age. And with their friendships, they may, when they're approaching a student, they may really want to try and make friends. Hi, I really want to be your friend. Do you want to be my friend? Do you want to talk about Pokemon? And so sometimes they might, instead of waiting for that reciprocity, they might be a little bit overwhelming, and that might be one of the reasons why they struggle in maintaining their friendships, even though their initiation might be really, really good. Paying attention and following instructions. They're sort of interwoven with, they might have difficulty with reading or writing, and so that part about paying attention and following instructions might be very difficult for them. So something like allowing them to stand in the back of the classroom, providing that they're not disruptive, might be a way to be able to mitigate that. Yeah, again, these are some of the more prominent signs at the elementary level. At the secondary level, when we get older, we begin to suppress a lot of the symptoms because we realize that there's more social consequences, particularly at the high school level. And so they might have difficulty managing deadlines and large projects. And because they're frustrated with some of the symptoms and some of the features that they're experiencing, they might have anger or anxiety, features of anxiety, stress, and sadness. And organization will be difficult. And so, this is why some strategies like learning how to become more organized can actually help to mitigate some of these signs and symptoms. And the other thing that I should note is that, what research shows is that students are pretty good at their self-awareness, at being able to identify these features, these signs and symptoms. They know that they're experiencing these features, and parents and teachers are also very good at being able to identify the consequences, so to speak. They know how they're doing academically and what the social and emotional consequences are in the classroom and on the schoolyard and at home. So there is research that shows that the awareness is there, and so really it's a matter of trying to fine-tune what it is that we're going to do about it. When we're exploring the features of ADHD, it's really important to make a distinction between observable indicators and cognitive indicators. This is something that we spoke about in the previous slide. Definitely obviously with the observable indicators, things like attention and impulsivity, we can see those things. But with the cognitive indicators, things like processing speed, a student a student may appear to be they need to take more time, and they need to take more time in understanding what they're learning in the classroom and at home. And as a result, they may appear to be processing slowly, or they are in fact slow processors. So it could be one or it could be both. The other thing with working memory, sometimes what I say to parents is that with working memory, particularly with mental math, so with working memory, it would be one's ability to manage information mentally, and so I just gave the example of mental math. But sometimes what I say to parents, what I mentioned before, is that your child might come home and you might say, what I'd like you to do is I want you to put your shoes away at the front of the house, and then I want you to go upstairs and put your dirty clothes in the hamper, and then come downstairs and get ready for dinner, wash your hands and get ready for dinner. And what you might find is that they might get lost after the second step or distracted, and so sometimes what I give as a recommendation is that, you can use something like a checklist, like a whiteboard, where you can actually list these 3 different things, make it tangible. They have to hold a marker or a pencil or a pen and actually check off when they're done doing these things, and that helps them to keep track. And at school, that would look something like, writing a rough draft for an essay, where they're able to keep track of their ideas so that their essay flows more smoothly, more fluidly when they end up writing. Okay, and of course that's also related to executive functioning, being able to start a task and to effectively problem solve, as well as to keep their emotions and their behavior in check. One of the things that I mentioned, another thing that I mentioned to parents is definitely with respect to personalization and precision. What I say is that when it comes to these recommendations, and a lot of my colleagues have been talking about different strategies throughout this presentation, but the rule is definitely that one size does not fit all. And another thing, when I'm consulting with parents and with teachers, is that there isn't a golden nugget with a lot of these suggestions. One of the main principles really that we should all strive for is definitely consistency and persistence, and to keep on trying these different strategies in the hopes that they'll all work, that it'll be a cumulative process, and to continue to try different things. What our team thought was most pertinent for this particular slide about providing a strategy that parents can use at home, because there's going to be a plethora of information that you've already collected from this presentation and from other things that you've read and consulted. But one strategy could be to provide autonomy supportive parenting. And basically you're allowing your child to explore their environment, to pick their environment, whether it be at the kitchen table or in their room, of course, provided that it's distraction free, and allowing them to initiate their homework, when to begin and when to end, and allowing them to take an active role in problem solving. So those are the 3 most important, most pertinent parts of what this means. Of course, you can alternate, and what I mean by that is, okay, allow your child to have some independence, because really what this does is it does promote competence, and they do feel socially supported when they're allowed sort of to make the decisions. But what I meant by alternating is that there can be times when they do need your help. So there can be times where you're suggesting to your child, now it's your turn to make these decisions and to do this on your own. And after you're done, you can circle the questions that you've had difficulty with, or whatever it may be, whether it be reading, any type of homework that they're having difficulty with, that you can help them afterward. So that's what I mean by alternating between help and independence. So one day you help them at the beginning and answer all of their questions, and on the next day they're on their own until the end, where they can come to you and ask questions. And then the other thing to keep in mind, as well as when they're making these decisions, is you can alternate, give it a try between alternating in the morning doing homework versus in the evening, because particularly students with ADHD are going to be tired when they get home, because of the amount of just because their day is long and the amount of work that they've had. So you can try doing homework in the morning and see if you have any success with that. So study tips for the student with ADHD. there's going to be just there's a mountain of resources out there, but again, these are some strategies that we feel would be helpful for parents, for teachers, and also obviously for students themselves. Picking the study schedule in advance is an important one. Not only is it important, there's a couple of components to this. Not only is it important to list the times. So, for example, I'm going to study for an hour in the evening from 6 till 7 p.m. It's also important for teachers. Teachers do this all the time. Teachers have a rubric, and they also have a schedule as far as what the students are going to learn throughout the day, and that just prepares the student. It primes them, pardon me, to know what's coming up and what to expect. And this is something that parents can do with their child if they need the help. The other thing that's important is research does show that when we are working on a task, when we're planning to work on a task, it's important to use concrete terms. So yes, you can say that you're going to work on your essay for an hour, but it's also important to list specifically what it is that you're going to do in that hour. Are you going to finish the introduction? Are you going to finish the introduction and the thesis, or the 3 accompanying points that support your idea or your topic, and or are you going to do the conclusion? So this is important to really specify what it is that you're going to work on, and you'll likely be more successful when using concrete terms. Again, picking the best time of day, morning versus evening. This is something we already spoke about. Taking breaks often. So for example, working for 25 minutes, take a 10 to 15 minute break, and then working for another 25 minutes. What I like to say to parents when I'm consulting with them, and with teachers as well, is that what's really important here is, pretend that you're in the dentist's chair. So if you're going to be doing homework for 25 minutes, if you're going to be doing work for 25 minutes, then there's no cell phone, there's no TV, there's no distractions. You're doing work for 25 minutes, and then when you take your break, you can have as many distractions as you want, provided that you're able to transition back to homework once the break is over. Obviously, these are things that you're going to have to fine-tune as you go along. The other thing too is making studying fun and rewarding is an important one, particularly for younger kids who are doing very, very challenging tasks, especially if they're doing it for the first time. My recommendation is that you make a big deal out of them having success on that task, particularly if it's the first time. So what I say by a big deal is, if it's possible, some sort of a reward, whether it be tangible or whether it be praise. Obviously that's up to you and up to the student. Maybe that's another area where you could ask your son or your daughter, what would they find would get them really motivated. Obviously you're going to run into a bit of trouble if they say that they want a PlayStation 5, but again, that's going to require some fine-tuning. The other thing is conceptual learning. Conceptual learning is really important. So what I mean by that is, so for example with math, my preference, my recommendation would be, for math, try number 1A, number 2A, number 3A, number 4A, rather than doing number 1A to Z. Because that way, you're learning the different concepts that the teacher is intending your son or daughter to learn at home. And so from a conceptual learning standpoint, what I recommend is for students when they get older to ask themselves, what is it that I need to learn today? And also and parents also to ask their son or daughter, what's the point of homework today? What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to learn? Acronyms are important. RTQ2 is something that I've never forgotten, that I always think to myself with emails, or particularly when I'm doing a test, is read the question twice. And then, there's also mnemonics that you can use. Never eat shredded wheat, learning the different directions on a map, northeast, southwest. And then showing how to find answers in a textbook or online is really, really important. And this pertains to students in all grades, at all levels, of all ages, adults as well. And really, it's important to talk about when you don't know the answer to a question, how are you going to find it? Where are you going to look? And to actually physically go through those steps and to show the student how to do that is really a way to teach how am I finding the answer, so that they can see and they can actually practice that process, because sometimes we take that process for granted. And of course, you can use color coding however you like. When you're doing math, that's particularly important. You can use different colors to signify, particularly when kids are young, to signify different processes. So whether they're adding or subtracting, adding is yellow, subtracting is blue, and so on and so forth. And then taking practice tests. It doesn't hurt to ask the teacher, do you have a practice test? Do you have a previous version of this test that you've done? Just again, this connects with that first point about planning the study schedule, is plan for that test and prepare for that test, so you know what the test looks like, because test taking in itself is a strategy on its own. The first thing I want to say is that there is research that shows that working on academic achievement and focusing on academic achievement in the classroom and at home actually helps to reduce and to mitigate some of the behavioral signs and symptoms that we see that are more outward for students with ADHD, that are more obvious. And so in the classroom, what that would look like is that asking a student to sit down, instead of asking a student to sit down, is to focus on whatever it is that they're struggling with. But these strategies help as well. So obviously self-regulation strategies, something like stopping and thinking, or I know that I need to get up and walk around so that I can solve this problem, or I need to go and get a drink, or I need 5 minutes to think about this question before I can answer it. Using a timer is always useful, whether it be for work periods or for a break, so a 2-minute warning. And then the changes in environment, this relates back to the schedule, that we're going to be doing gym for 30 minutes before we transition back to the classroom, or we're going to go to the park for an hour before we go back home, and to allow that student to have a look at the timer, and whether it's on your phone or it's an actual stopwatch. And teaching students about how to develop timelines and how to budget time is really important. And what you could do is you could create a journal. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a small piece of paper, and just talking about let's compare, what did you want to finish today, what did you want to have done, and how long did it actually take, because sometimes the amount of time that it takes to do something exceeds sort of what we thought, and that will help to sort of that will help for students to get to know themselves better and what they're capable of doing in a certain amount of time. And of course, this relates also to making to-do lists. These are important so that if you don't accomplish all the things that you wanted to accomplish in a given day, you can go back at it the next day. And obviously, reinforcing process is really important. That's that second last point there, because just the fact that they're doing the work and that they're trying to be independent, and that they're trying to stay focused and to overcome some of the features that they're struggling with, that should definitely be praised and rewarded, particularly at the beginning, when they're deciding to make changes about how they work. So when we're working with students with ADHD, it really does require communication across different professionals. It's important to consult with the teachers and with the principals and with parents, because with the tutor, because different people have different strategies and different experiences working with these students. And the most important part of this particular slide would be the transition plans. And what we mean by school to school, grade to grade, and class to class is that it's really important that when a student is going to a different school or different school board, and they're going through different grades, this is when it's particularly important, particularly pertinent to talk to the different professionals that have taught this student and work with this student, so that so we can all maintain consistency. It's hard enough for students with ADHD to have these different environments and and to transition from grade to grade, because it's continuous change, and it's more difficult for them to deal with continuous change versus other students. And ongoing capacity building is important as well. Professional development and parent programs and student advocacy. So how can the student become a better advocate on their own, and how can parents become better by continuously reading and doing workshops that improve their skills? And the same goes for the professionals that deal with students, that work with students with ADHD.
Thanks, Mikkel. So now we've explored what ADHD is, its prevalence, what it looks like at home and within the school, and some of the suggested strategies to help kids manage some of these difficulties. Next, we're going to dive into ADHD and sleep, particularly what the relationship is between these two areas. The first question after the last slide might be why? Why are we examining the relationship between ADHD and sleep? We can get to the relationship bit in just one moment. But first, it is important to highlight that the pandemic as a whole has affected the sleep habits of many people, with or without ADHD. Indeed, recent data suggests that about 50% of Canadians have reported worsening mental health since the pandemic, with much of the decline being experienced by youth. For example, consider such impacts of having a shortened morning routine, if at all, that changes the way we used to all get ready to start the day. Or the social isolation or increased boredom that ends up resulting in increased screen use or gaming or socializing virtually, which usually happens at night. So all of these factors can disrupt sleep and the overall level of cognitive ability for anyone, but certainly children and adolescents with ADHD are particularly vulnerable to its effects. The prominent researcher, Dr. Weiss, describes ADHD as a 24-hour disorder. We typically think of ADHD as a problem with behavior during the day, but whatever the neurophysiology is that drives the symptoms of problems with attention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, it is actually really closely linked with difficulties in sleep. And we typically think of sleep as something that just happens, but it actually needs to be understood as a skill, and with that, a skill that needs to be developed. In other words, it's that sleep is a physiological entity, but a developmental skill that needs to be entrained. So by entrained, that means it needs to match, so the biological clock needs to match what is going on in the environment around us. We'll return to this a little bit later. For now, let's talk more about ADHD as a 24-hour disorder. If we look at this slide, we can see pretty clearly how ADHD is manifested throughout the day and into the evening. Although some would argue that most children, and particularly adolescents, have difficulty getting up in the morning, individuals with ADHD have particular difficulty with this. They also have difficulty getting themselves organized to go to school. During school, individuals with ADHD are typically observed to experience a lot of difficulty focusing in class, paying attention, being easily distracted, being disorganized, and they have a lot of difficulty initiating and completing their work. Social difficulties have also been observed with poor behavioral regulation. After school, individuals are quite typically reluctant to get started with homework, and they experience a lot of the same difficulties that they experienced at school at home as well. And bedtime is certainly no exception. Individuals with ADHD experience significant difficulty winding down and falling asleep, which is quite disruptive in its own right. Now, if it takes a child that much longer to fall asleep, then the amount of overall restorative sleep that the child is getting is less than optimal, which further exacerbates their symptoms the following day, and so on and so on and so on. So now we can begin to see how this is a vicious cycle, where the effects of one feed right into the other. Both would be considered disorders of dysregulation. That is, ADHD is inherently a disorder of self-regulation, and sleep difficulties are usually construed as being disorders associated with circadian rhythms. Both manifest during the day and night. Now, when we really think about what sleep entails, it is a very attention-demanding task. We have to quiet our thoughts, lay still, stay quiet, and try to sleep. So thinking of sleep this way, it's perhaps not surprising then that children with ADHD often complain of going to sleep as being extremely boring, or that they can't turn their mind off. Research in sleep and ADHD suggesting that individuals with ADHD experience what is called social jet lag. So they're going to sleep at a different time than what is expected for the rest of society, but still expected to wake up at a typical time. And this reduced sleep can cause a fair bit of impairment, not surprisingly. Now, secondly, research has shown that individuals with ADHD have a delayed release of melatonin up to 1.5 hours later, and 30 minutes later is when that melatonin hits a therapeutic level. So we could see that this, coupled with the difficulty in falling asleep because it's an attention-demanding task, makes it extremely challenging for kids with ADHD to actually fall asleep. So what is important to take away from this slide is that sleep problems and ADHD often coexist, and they can make each other worse, which causes quite a bit of impairment. It's important to also know that improvement in treatment in one area doesn't necessarily change the other, but can certainly lead to overall improvement in outcome. Here we address two common myths. The first one being the amount of actual sleep that children with ADHD get. I mean, in reality, because of the sleep difficulties, they typically get less sleep than a child without ADHD. But what is right for one child is not necessarily right for another. But what's important to know here is that many parents believe that the key to getting more sleep at night is to go to bed earlier. So typically what is done is parents move the bedtime earlier. Now, the difficulty with this is that because the right time is not necessarily the time that the individual or the child is tired, they haven't had a chance to build up sleep debt. And also their melatonin onset is now off course even further. So these factors alone actually impede sleep and makes it worse. So what needs to happen is to restrict sleep or to start their routine at their regular time, but to wake them up earlier, gradually to your target time, even if there is resistance or fatigue in the morning. The idea is to promote natural sleepiness during the day and to build in sleep debt. So over time, the sleepiness during the day will encourage sleep at a more appropriate time. Now, the second is a notion that a child cannot be tired because he or she is hyper or full of energy. Paradoxically, that is the norm. If you think about it, an overtired child is a silly hyper. It often appears silly or hyper. And this is much closer to what is seen in a child with ADHD who is not getting adequate sleep and experiencing excessive daytime sleepiness.
Thank you, Leanne. So there are a number of factors and behaviors that can hinder a healthy sleep, and these may be particularly an issue for teenagers. Alcohol, marijuana, vaping, particularly alcohol, is toxic to sleep. It causes middle of the night waking. Marijuana may be self-medication for sleep problems that teenagers may tend to use. They use it for falling asleep. Texting and emailing after lights out, even once per week, dramatically increases self-reported sleepiness among teens, research has shown. And being hungry may also be impeding sleep and lead to the teenager getting up or staying up to eat. But there is a simple intervention. Go to bed at the same time in a dark room. Don't use your phone. Don't watch Netflix. These are simple interventions that can work. Studies show that in therapy, even 2 visits to review these things can make a difference. Exercise daily. Ensure ideal temperature, sound, and light. Kids, particularly with ADHD, may demonstrate bedtime resistance. That means going to bed is an attention-demanding activity. It involves getting into pajamas, going to bed, lying down, and that is boring. So they do all kinds of other things. A key concept to sleep is that of the Zeitgeber. That is a German term meaning time giver. All of us have Zeitgebers that associate with falling asleep. For example, bedtime conversations, toys, saying prayers. All these Zeitgebers are very critical for the entrainment of sleep. Also, it is important to set the clock in the morning by waking the child up at the same time every day. This sets the internal clock more effectively and avoids bedtime resistance. The number one recommendation for parents is you also should go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time. Don't take drugs that keep you up. Go to bed well fed. Shift the clock by waking yourself up rather than going to bed early. So sleep management is a family-based executive function that needs to be done to entrain sleep developmentally. It is a family affair. As mentioned, in ADHD, the onset of the hormone melatonin, which regulates sleep, can be delayed. The ADHD expert Dr. Weiss makes the point that by giving the child melatonin, which is natural, you are correcting the deficit in release of melatonin that occurs in that population. So you are actually not introducing something that is foreign to the body. It doesn't work for all children, but research has shown benefit and few adverse events. However, there are a few cautions that are being discussed in the presentation referenced in our next slide. So you may want to review that and also ask your child's physician about the use and dosage. It only puts you to sleep. So for children waking up in the middle of the night, an extended release melatonin may be needed. Melatonin is the only drug where there's no tolerance, no withdrawal. However, if melatonin becomes a Zeitgeber, it may be more difficult to go without it because it is part of the routine. So there is a psychological component. You will be going back to being a bad sleeper as you were before when you stop using it. Next, there are stimulants, which are an important evidence-based component of treatment for ADHD. That is why a lot of children are receiving treatment with stimulant medication. It is possible that this medication will cause some sleep difficulties in a subset of children, but some children actually sleep very well. As discussed, children with ADHD present with sleep deficits, which may improve with long-term stimulant use, and the research suggests that more children go from bad sleepers to good sleepers than the other way around. Again, check with your treating pediatrician about this. A lot of the information we have shared with you about ADHD and sleep is based on training in literature authored by an eminent expert in this field, Dr. Margaret Weiss. You can find a full presentation by Dr. Weiss on YouTube at the link shown in this slide. Another helpful resource for tips how to encourage sleep habits for all children during this pandemic and beyond can be found on the Sleep On It Canada website depicted above. Check it out.
We wanted to include this message written by a student with ADHD named Johnny, and the following is Johnny's message that he provided when he was asked what he would like to tell his teachers. And as you can see, the message says, "Never stop believing in us. We are very smart and capable, and with patience, love, and guidance, we can and will succeed in life." And we thought that this was a really positive message and important to include in our presentation to you today. Okay, now let's talk about learning from home. So last March, as we know, the rapid transition to online learning was difficult for most students and families. A year later, while we've had more time to adjust to our new normal, the shift from in-person to remote learning is still challenging and can elicit a range of emotional responses. To best support our students with ADHD during this period of remote learning, we turned to the research to learn about how last year's school closures impacted Canadian children with ADHD. Canadian researchers, High and colleagues, developed an online survey to understand the educational impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children with ADHD. Parents of children with ADHD aged 5 to 18 years were encouraged to complete this survey. A total of 587 surveys were completed. Significant challenges in adjusting to online learning were reported by most parents. Some reasons listed were hard time staying focused, too many distractions in the home environment, material not being engaging enough, having to share laptops and computers with other sibling and family members, not having a quiet or optimal space for learning, and difficulty with internet connection. The study also found that students with ADHD were engaging in reduced hours of online instruction. Specifically, the data found that 41% of children with ADHD spent less than 5 hours per week on their schoolwork, and they found that the majority of online learning for children with ADHD was dependent on parents. While the majority of parents tried to create and follow a routine, several reported that it was very or extremely challenging for their child to adjust to this new routine at home. Parents also reported executive functioning challenges and significant mental health challenges in their children, especially related to depressive and anxiety symptoms. It was found that online learning was also more challenging for students who had difficulty starting and managing tasks and were exhibiting depressive symptoms. As we enter another period of remote learning, it's important to keep in mind that we're here to support you. So on our next few slides, we'll be talking about strategies that you can implement at home to help with remote learning. So as I just mentioned, on this slide, we'll be talking about strategies that you can implement at home to best support your child. And these 6 tips that we have listed here on the slide come directly from the European ADHD Guidelines Group. And the first tip that they have listed here is focused on keeping positive and staying motivated. I think that we can all agree we're living in really extraordinary times, and it's important to keep in mind that no parent is perfect. It's also really important to share our experiences with others, whether that be our family, friends, or other members of our community, and taking time each day to take care of ourselves and doing something that we enjoy. The second tip that they have listed here is making sure that all family members know what's expected of them. So agreeing to house rules, keeping those rules simple, and putting those rules up on display in your home for everyone to be able to refer back to. The third tip that they have listed here is focused on building your child's self-confidence and trust in you. Children often act up if they're feeling uncertain or anxious, and taking the time to listen to them is really important. The fourth tip is focused on helping your child to follow instructions. So using strategies such as moving to the same room as them, removing distractions, and making eye contact before giving an instruction is going to be really beneficial for your child. The fifth tip that they have focuses on promoting better behavior. So using strategies, for example, such as rewards to encourage your child to follow rules that you have in your home. And the sixth and final tip that they have listed here is focused on limiting conflicts. So keeping your child occupied, sticking to routines as best as you can, and also trying to plan your days ahead of time. So as I mentioned, these strategies are posted here on our slide, and they're there for you to refer back to and for you to implement in your home as needed. So over these next few slides, we're going to summarize the information that we've covered in our presentation today. So first, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that may impact attention, activity levels, impulsivity, executive functioning, working memory, and processing speed. Developing and implementing a sleep hygiene routine is critical to students' well-being and development. And the number one recommendation for parents is to encourage their child to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time each day. For students diagnosed with ADHD, it's important that teachers and mental health professionals collaborate with students and their parents to develop a support plan and specific strategies. It's also important to be familiar with and use your school board's referral process when needed to engage mental health professionals and community partners. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really important that we take a team-based approach and work together as a community to best support our students. So on these last few slides of our presentation, we've listed several different resources that you can refer to following our talk today. I also would like to remind you that throughout our presentation, we've shared with you many different strategies and tips that you can also refer back to. We want to thank you for taking the time to listen to us talk today, and we hope that we've been able to provide you with some really useful information and strategies to help you at home.
Us sharing our expertise on these issues, and I hope that you were able to gain some valuable insight that can help you with your children and help you manage sleep and ADHD symptoms. I should note that in addition to the resources that we have posted during the presentation, on this slide here, you see a number of resources that you can use if you are in a situation where you need to reach out to community resources immediately or in times of an emergency. We have the Reach Out Center for Kids Crisis Line, Woodview Child and Autism Services, Kids Help, as well as the police services. So this was the 5th of 6 sessions. As we said, all the presentations are recorded and will be available on the board website for on-demand viewing. And we've covered student mental health and well-being during COVID-19, student anxiety, parenting during the pandemic, family matters, raising a resilient child, family wellness, and positive mental health during COVID-19 is the last one, as well as this one. So we hope that you will find all of these presentations helpful, and please provide feedback to us, and we hope you enjoy these presentations at your own leisure. And you will find here on this last slide in QR code that you can use by holding your phone up to provide feedback, or use the hyperlink that's provided to record your feedback on this session. And we really welcome your feedback. It helps us plan for future events and programs. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope that this was helpful for you. Have a good night on behalf of our team and our communications team as well.